You're listening to Wise Women with Daisy Khan, where faith rolls up its sleeves as a force for good and where women define the future with wisdom and wonder. I'm Daisy Khan, author, speaker, and a Muslim woman who spent her life wrestling with a messy, miraculous collision of faith and real life. And kindly subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Today we will discuss Juneteenth, which marks the emancipation of enslaved people in America. You may be wondering why dig up these painful stories, because today some of these chains are still rattling away, in a way that people are held back, in how voices are being silenced, and in how we continue to fight for human dignity. We really need to understand the past so that we can draw some lessons from inspiring luminaries who have fought these battles before us. So I'm going to take us back to the journey of 7th century Arabia, where a young man named Muhammad, who was not a prophet yet, discovered that his surrogate mother, Baraka, had been enslaved. He was so horrified by this that he declared her free as a wind. He said, "Go, go." But of course, Baraka was not going to leave him, so she stayed with him until she died. At the age of 40, when he became a prophet, as he received revelations from Angel Gabriel, the message was very simple. There's only one God, and all human beings are created equal. His message shook the foundations of Meccan society. But with his wife, who was a wealthy merchant, he sowed the seeds of emancipation within his home. And they treated their slaves not as property, but as family. And one day, while he was walking, he witnessed a man being flogged by his master. So he intervened and offered to double the man's price to secure this man's freedom. And when he learned, as he started becoming conscious of this issue, when he learned that a lot of enslaved people were stolen as children, stripped of their dignity, he told them, "Speak. Your minds are your own." One of his earliest followers, as he was now a prophet and spreading his message, was Sumaya bin Khayyat. She was also an enslaved Yemeni woman. She accepted Islam immediately, and then she went door to door, banging on the doors, urging women to reject female infanticide. And she told other enslaved people to think for themselves. Her master Ammar was so angry that he demanded she renounce her faith. And of course, she refused. And he then, in turn, bound her and buried her in the sand with her head up. And while he was towering over her body, she continued to defy him. And she said, "You don't control my mind nor my heart. They all belong to my God." And that's when he plunged a spear in her heart and killed her. Thus, Sumaya became Islam's first martyr. And there's even a verse that was revealed right after her death. The Quran affirms her sacrifice. Never say those who are martyred in God's cause are dead. They are very much alive. Meanwhile, Prophet Muhammad's followers grew, but so did the backlash. So one day he left town to seek some refuge, and there he met this man named Bilal, an enslaved African shepherd. He asked Bilal to come sit next to me, and it was the first time that Bilal felt like he was an equal. Of course, he immediately became a Muslim. And of course, his master also tortured him, dragged him across Mecca in the hot sand, because he wanted to make an example out of him in the hot sand. And as Bilal was crying, "God is one, God is one." The Prophet was so grieved by this that he asked his friend and companion, Abu Bakr, to buy Bilal's freedom. And of course, Bilal was freed. The Quran declared emancipation as a path of spiritual excellence. Khadija and Abu Bakr spent all their fortunes liberating thousands of slaves, who then became the Prophet's followers. Centuries later, across the Atlantic, America's promise of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness rang hollow for many enslaved Africans. 10% of them were Muslim. They carried Islam in their hearts, praying in secret and finding solace in the Quran's message of liberation. Today we're honoring Juneteenth, but we're also reclaiming a truth that long before 1865, Islam's earliest teachings call for abolition. The Prophet freed slaves, he elevated them as leaders, and declared, "He who enslaves a person is not one of us." And so, how does this legacy intersect with American story of emancipation? How did enslaved Muslims preserve their faith? And why does Juneteenth matter for us all, whether a Muslim or not? Okay, to unpack this, I'm thrilled to welcome Quran Shakir. Madam Q, as she's affectionately called, is passionate about education, training young people to advocate, lead, and serve. In addition to being certified as a JEGNA, Master Educator, she is a radio talk show host, and the show is called The Power of Educating Our Own. A freelance writer, a leader in interfaith relations, a called-upon motivational speaker, and co-owner of Celebrating Sacred Connections, an agency for honoring the scriptural beauty and power of women. Madam Q, let's start at the very beginning. I mentioned to people that there are only roughly 3 to 6 million Muslims in America, and 40% of them are African American. So I'd like to go back to the very early days. Are there any stories of how they preserved their faith under enslavement, and were there any specific rituals or resistance practices tied to Islam?
Absolutely, and we cannot discount the horrific experience that the enslaved movement caused for the African and the African American. And one of those that the enslaver worked really hard to do was to erase Islam from the souls of those people. Came here with Quran on their tongues and in their hearts. Many of them, because of our religious practices, were those who believed in what Allah has revealed to us about not eating pork, fasting, praying. So when you look at what the enslaved African has to do, they had to sneak, go into the woods to make salat, because the enslaver made it forbidden for the enslaved to read, to worship in their natural way, to speak their language, or to even dress in their cultural traditions. All of that was forbidden. They were beaten for using the language of Quran, of speaking Arabic. The Muslims worked really, really hard to maintain those traditions, speaking these words into the children at night. And anyone who's familiar with the movie Roots, it does a really good job of demonstrating some of those things that Kunta Kinte had to do to preserve his Islam. And he was a Muslim who was brought and captured and brought here to the country.
So I did not know any of this history. When I saw Roots, it was the first time I actually realized what had happened with African Americans. It was extremely powerful at that time. And I did not know that Kunta Kinte was a Muslim. That was not made very clear in the Roots series, if I remember correctly. I've heard stories of women's role in kind of like bringing certain things with them that have become staples in America. Can you describe some of that?
Absolutely. So we're geniuses, number one, and that's not talked about enough. And even
well, let's talk about it. We're here.
That's right. We're going to talk about it. Even when we talk about, you said you didn't see that clear distinction of Kunta being a Muslim, but when you read the book, it's clear in there. So for the women who were coming, and women were really the ones who brought salvation really to the experiences, because women have a way of nurturing. But it was so wise and smart because not knowing where we were going, we wanted to take a part of the land with us. And so we would take the grains of rice, we take the seeds of hibiscus, take the seeds of okra, take the seeds of many of the plants that we have here in America. We think just happened. It didn't. We brought that. How did we get it here? Since there was so much, oh my goodness, oppression and so much opposition to us. The women would braid these seeds in the hair. And even when you think about enslaved, when they were running away, they would want to take some of the seeds with them so that they can reproduce life wherever they were going. So sometimes we look at these cornrows and these hairstyles as just hairstyles. It's more than that. When you look at these styles, there were certain cornrow styles that became a roadmap for those who were seeking liberation. Or if we have the braids that became close together, they represented there's a railroad in this area here. So the style of the hair became a roadmap to your freedom as you're going out. They would make quilts that also had maps on them, and they told a story. Or they would make the quilt and be able to slide things inside of the quilt to be able to use it as they were escaping. The quilt itself, they would hang it on a fence so people could come by and look at it and see. Oh. Genius, right?
Yes, spy masters, spy masters.
Absolutely.
So how did we go from the early Muslims preserving whatever they could, elements of their culture? How did they find their roots?
So, in Islam, there's oral tradition anyway, but also in the West African tradition is oral traditions where we pass those stories down verbally. Kunta told his daughter Kizzy the story, and Kizzy told her son the story, and it kept going like that for generation after generation. It may get watered down.
Yeah.
They miss some of it. So there were halal traditions, like we wash our food and we make sure that when we're cooking, that we're cooking to please Allah. We say Bismillah over our food. The dress, even in wearing modest clothing. So even in the enslavement movement, when we were forced to read the Bible, some would read Quran and give Quran in that reading of the Bible and make sure that it was understood. There is a church in Savannah that has pews, and on the back of the pews is inscribed Quranic ayats. And they, even though they rebuilt that church, they saved those pews to be able to tell that story. Even in the naming of the children had in it traditions that maintain the Islam and the culture of the people. When Kunta named his daughter Kizzy, they thought that it was after something that was on the land, but it was a name that meant you stay put.
Right. So if we would just to broaden this, because although we are focused on the Muslims right now, just to understand that there's the whole broader African community that has come here. What is the contribution, the cultural contribution, the leftovers or whatever they brought from their homeland, whatever's part of their DNA? What contributions did they make? What did they bring that has become like part of American fabric right now?
I think the first thing we would talk about would be music.
Soul music.
Yes. So we have the soul music, we have hip hop, and we have language where we tell stories in our music. So even when you look at country music, the telling of the story in the music, that's a part of the American tradition, but it comes from us. So a simple thing like a cowrie shell. And I told my granddaughter the other day, you see these are cowrie shells, and these shells come from West Africa, and we use them for money. So to be able to tell those kinds of stories, even in our dance movements, and how we move.
That Michael Jackson, that was probably
and we used to call each other with drums from village to village. We use drums to call each other. So if you see an African or African American child beating on their desk, it's in their DNA. And I always say, don't punish the child because he's just calling back his roots. A few weeks ago, and I was the only African American in the room. And one young woman said, I never understood why Black people talk like they do until she read this book that we were looking at. And it was, we were beaten if we spoke our language. And then we have a certain way that our tongues are made to speak. We have to condition ourselves to use this European language, which is different for us, and everybody is not able to do. So all of that was a part of those traditions. But even the foods we eat, who was cooking for the enslaver? It was us. We were their cooks. And
you were the farmers too. You were farming.
Yes, we farmed the land and we cooked the food. We sold. We made the clothes. That's who we were. We built the White House. Let's say that.
Oh, you did build the White House? Okay, so I did not know that. Can we just give me a little bit?
Yes, it was. Okay. So when we talk about what did we leave to America, we built the White House. And that was one of the things that former First Lady Michelle Obama mentioned. She's in this house that my ancestors built. We made the bricks.
Mm-hmm.
We were the architects
Mm-hmm.
of structures, the
Mm-hmm.
architects of language.
Right.
So we brought all of that with us and we leave that here in this country. So we are woven into the fabric. So when they say go back to your homeland, this is my homeland. I built this place.
You made this place.
That's right. That's
That's
right. Yes.
I
And
mean, you
it's
just
so
have to
many
look
things.
around. You just have to look around the galas and see how many African Americans are successful in whether it's in sports or whether it's in entertainment, how much contribution they are making. So going back to the
But let me
Muslim,
say
yeah,
one thing
yeah,
too, because, even when we look at a holiday like Memorial Day,
mm-hmm.
Memorial Day began because the formerly enslaved, after the Civil War, they wanted to celebrate the African Americans who fought in the Civil War who were not honored.
Oh, I
And
see.
so there was a big celebration for them that
Mm.
our community had, and that the broader country began to pick up. And that's how Memorial Day became a holiday,
Oh,
to
wonderful.
celebrate the warriors in the Civil War.
So going back to like Muslims who now found their roots, you know, contemporary Muslims. Can you just name a few that for the American public so we can just remember who they are, what they're contributing? Just a few people that come to your mind.
Yes. Whenever people talk about Black Muslims in America, the first ones they mention, Muhammad Ali. So he's one of the most popular that we have. And I love to also mention some of our contemporary. So
Mhm.
even Most Def, I don't know if you know him.
Oh yes, of course,
People
most
love
deaf.
Most Def. Most Def is Muslim. You
Yeah,
have Ibtihaj Muhammad.
yeah,
And you have so many like Bilkis. She's
right.
a basketball player, a famous
Yeah,
basketball player
yeah.
here. And then you even have most recently Brock, the sister who has produced a lot of soap operas. And one of my favorites is the Clara Muhammad, who changed the state of education in our country because homeschool was considered illegal. And Sister Clara Muhammad stood her ground and that's how homeschool became legalized in our country in the 1950s.
So what was she just started a movement because she wanted to homeschool, and then what was the resistance for that?
Oh, and it's beautiful. It's rooted just in what we're talking about when we talk about Juneteenth and we talk about this idea of liberation.
Right,
Children were going to public school, which was considered the way to educate American children.
right.
They were going there and they were hearing things like, we rescued you in Africa because you were just monkeys swinging on trees and
Oh,
you had no sense of intellect and we
yeah.
brought you here. Her children would come home crying and complaining about that. And Sister Clara Muhammad didn't want that for her children. She wanted them to understand their real history. She wanted them to appreciate their blackness and have joy in being who they are and their history as people of genius. And so what she did was she kept them home and decided to teach them herself. The
Mm.
police came to her house and said to her, "You are breaking the law and you will go to jail." And we have these famous words that we love to say of Sister Clara Muhammad. She grabbed hold of the doorknob and said, "I'll be dead as this doorknob before I let my children go to your school." And that became her stance, her big move. And with that, that's how was born the Muhammad schools that you find all over the country today. But it
Mm.
began in the home of Sister Clara Muhammad and that fight that she initiated in the 1930s.
Wow. Who knew that? Another little factoid. Thank you so much. So let's go to Juneteenth now. When did the emancipation movement begin? When I heard the word Juneteenth, it just surfaced as a holiday for me, right? One day it became official. It was a holiday. We had to take the day off. And so
Yeah.
I'd also like you to just explain how it got obscured and what happened. Why did it disappear?
So we all know the story of the Civil War and that battle between the North and the South, and how President Lincoln had a big decision to make. And I often will explain President Lincoln didn't make that decision because he was a great man who cared about the enslaved. He had his own enslaved Africans. He did it as a political move. he needed to find peace in his country. And so he signed the Emancipation Proclamation January 1, 1863. Well, we're fighting this battle, this war, the country is torn. So in this fighting, the word, we didn't have social media, we didn't have telephones, we didn't have a way to get the word out really quickly. And so there were men on horses who rode across the country to go and tell every plantation, the war is over, there's no more enslavement. And some of them graciously honored it, and some like, no, we're not doing that. So it took them a while. It took them 2.5 years to get to Texas to tell the enslavers in Texas, war is over. And so they made it there 2.5 years later on June 19th, 1865. And that is the day that the enslaved people in Galveston, Texas, were informed of their freedom. And the delay was due to resistance of the enslavers and to lack of federal enforcement as well, and the systematic communication suppression. So when they get there, now they're like, oh, wow, this is great. And it's a celebration. And that's how Juneteenth was born, because of the celebration that these enslaved Africans had. Like, we're free. Oh, my God. Hallelujah. Glory, glory. Allahu Akbar. And all the great things that come with being liberated. So it represents a delayed justice. Juneteenth is this holiday. It says this is delayed justice. This is resilience. This is community celebrating our liberation. Yeah. So this began in the late 1800s, right? 1865. And right. They got their freedom, and they wanted to do more. So they were raising funds. They were cooking meals. They were having sewing classes, and gathering their communities to mark this sacred day. So that's how the Juneteenth happened, because it was the 19th. That's how we got the word for Juneteenth. And I know even then they called it Jubilee Day. It wasn't Juneteenth. It was called Jubilee Day. And the freedom that came with that was the joy also that came with that. So there was one story from Houston where a group of women in the 1870s organized their Jubilee Day celebration, where they got together to cook and raise money. And then they did this year after year until they were able to purchase Emancipation Park, which is a 10-acre plot of land, so that their people would always have a place to remember. And even when Jim Crow laws tried to silence the public celebrations, it was women, grandmothers, school teachers, church mothers who kept the tradition alive in their backyards and in their basements.
So these are the unsung heroines?
Yes.
That just kept spreading the news of freedom. So then why did Juneteenth fade from public memory?
Like I said, because of the things that we had in our country. It was violence that happened in our country. So we had Jim Crow, we had laws that prohibited the enslaved, or the formerly enslaved, from being happy about their freedom, from celebrating or even finding success. There was so much that was done just to denigrate and to hold back. So that's, even when we look at what's going on today, we look at how our country operates. A lot of things were put in place just to erase and to hold back and to hold on to trauma for the African American people. And sometimes we think, well, why can't they get ahead? Because the way our system is set up, we can't get ahead. So all of that was to suppress the holiday itself and the celebration. I left Georgia to go to school in Texas, and I had not heard of Juneteenth. And when I went to school in Dallas, that's when I heard of it. And that was in the 70s. And they were celebrating it then. On my campus, I was at HBCU, a historically Black college and university. So I'm there celebrating with them. And they're explaining this story to us.
We talked about the shackles that still hold us back. I mean, how does this Juneteenth legacy inform today's struggle for racial justice?
In many ways, when we look at the battle that we have for racial justice. We have, first of all, to understand what happened. So we have Jim Crow laws, like I said. We have violence and intimidation. White supremacists were terror groups that invaded the communities and instilled fear in people. So when you look at an Emmett Till, who was just a boy before he could even get to his teens, who he was really an example. When we're lynched and hung from trees, the hanging from the trees is a reminder. So as a teacher, I had my students reading this book and understanding this story of how the enslaved Africans were looking for liberation, and they formed a coup to escape, and they were doing really good with the escaping. But there was one, and they trained us to go against one another. And one went and told his enslaver, this is what's happening. And so then they spread the word. And once they heard it, then they got all of the ones who organized, chopped their heads off, hung their heads on fences, so that anybody who sees it would think twice before they think about trying to be liberated. All of that contributes to the DNA today of how we honor the enslaver over our own history, over our own selves. And we had the movements where they took land, even after, we were promised 40 acres and a mule, and some people got it. It was taken. So with that, Black communities being pushed off of land that they actually owned, that contributes today to very few of us own our own land, or even have the ability to purchase our own land. It's not in our families anymore. Even I talked about Sister Clara Muhammad and education. So even in our educational system, the public schools and the textbooks often ignored or distorted the history of Black resistance and emancipation. So enslavement was often minimized or romanticized even. And so it wasn't taught of how, like you look at a holiday like Juneteenth, it was not taught. And the stories of Black self-liberation were omitted. All of that contributes to what we have today. And one of the biggest things that we have would be the commercialization of the 4th of July. That was a big thing, because as July 4th became a national holiday, a national spectacle, so to speak, Juneteenth was seen as unpatriotic. Or it was, quote unquote, redundant. So when we look at today, the resistance that we're showing, despite this erasure, Black families and Black churches, we kept Juneteenth alive. And we look at, what do we do today to find our liberation, to elevate ourselves, to build unity amongst ourselves? And it's all in these traditions that we have formed with Juneteenth. So Juneteenth has in it several traditions that we can talk about when we're looking at what is it. So you see certain colors. You see the red, the black, the green. All of that goes into us preserving our history and our culture. Even when we look at like the January 1st, when we are eating our foods, we have the black-eyed peas and the rice. That's from us, and it's designed to bring good luck. But that we brought that tradition because we were looking for any kind of thing that's going to bring us some joy. We were never complacent. Not ever were we complacent.
So it must have brought you a lot of hope when Juneteenth became a federal holiday. It was recognized as a federal holiday.
Yeah, so a lot of things to say, well, it's about time. But the idea of the federal holiday, though, I think was more beneficial for America and those who were not African and African American.
Yeah. So personally, with all the dehumanization that has been going on in so many different ways, how do you use your faith to resist that dehumanization?
I love Allah. And I love how Allah in the Quran, he says, be sure we would test you. That's number one. So we understand that we're going to be tested. And it is in the testing that we find our faith. So for me, I hold on to that. I also hold on to my family and my community. And we find ways to find joy and celebration amongst ourselves. And in that, this love of Quran links us together. So we're able to pray together. And in our praying, then our praying is not just words. We pray with action. We teach Quran as a part of mathematics, as a part of social studies, as a part of the English class. Is weaved into everything we do. When we start to tell the story of my people, the African and the African American people of color, I always like us to be mindful of the language that we use in telling the story. In telling this story, I think we discussed Juneteenth and the road to liberation. We have to choose words that affirm the full humanity of our ancestors. No one was born a slave. They were enslaved. So we don't want to use the language as the slaves. They were enslaved because these were scholars. These were farmers. These were builders. These were healers and believers long before they were forced into bondage. That's what we want people to remember. That's the thing that drives my actions personally. So those who claim ownership over them were not masters. No, they were violators of God's law and human dignity. And I love the words of Imam W.D. Muhammad, who said to us, words make people. We believe this. We choose this to be intentional in our language, and we urge all of you, your viewers and your listeners who really want to make a difference, to be intentional in their language choices as well. And so I'd say that the guiding principle has to be that no human being is a slave. People were enslaved by force, and others illegally claimed ownership over them. So the language centers human dignity and truth. The words we use shape the way we understand history every day. We choose language that honors their humanity, honors their agency, and honors their legacy. So we say to you, no, not slave, enslaved, or African in bondage, because this centers the personhood. We say, don't say slavery, say system of enslavement or forced labor system, because it names it as a system, not a condition of being. And not slave master, enslaver, or captor, because that strips away the false authority and the ownership. Not slave owner, because that's a person who claimed ownership. That was an exploiter. No one can truly own another human, not a plantation, a forced labor camp. Imagine the difference that makes when we call it that over a plantation, a forced labor camp, an enslavement site. Imagine the difference. Or instead of a runaway slave, a freedom seeker. Isn't that empowering? A freedom seeker, a self-liberated person. And instead of a freed man or a freed woman, let's do this. How about self-emancipated person, formerly enslaved person, and even
formerly enslaved person.
Formerly enslaved person. And even look at the auction block or the slave trade, as they call it. Let's remove the slave trade, that language, slave trade. It was human trafficking. That's what it was, human trafficking, or the transatlantic kidnapping. That reflects the violent and the criminal nature of what happened. So all of that grounds me. It keeps me going. It gives me hope. It makes it easy for me to practice my faith and to be a woman of color, making a difference, inshallah, in this world.
Yeah. Well, I remember when I first said slaves, I was reprimanded immediately by an African-American sister of mine who I hold in high regard. And she said to me, we don't say that. We say enslaved. And since then, I've been changing my language too. You know, we're all learning.
Yes.
And that's part of why we're here. You're an educator. You're from this community. This is about showing the true reality of what people experienced. And one of the things that's always been bothering me about this whole movement and about this enslavement is that people who are religious, who understand where we all come from, and yet the church has kept quiet for so long. They never said anything about people being enslaved, right? I've never really understood that. I mean, why did they, if they had just raised their voices and said this was wrong or this is a sin, things would have changed a lot earlier.
Absolutely. When you were talking, one of the things that came to my mind, you know, that the enslaver, he changed the language of the Bible, the book he was trying to bring to us, to make it seem like this is the right thing to do. So you have in religion people who believed it to be okay. And then they also were afraid for their own lives. There were people who had more power, more strength, and more abilities to keep the people down. And so the people didn't rise up and speak as they should have. But you did have some who did. They were called abolitionists.
Yeah.
And they were the people who supported the Underground Railroad. And they supported this process in their way. It was just a big battle. And that's a part of the Civil War even, because there were people inside of the Civil War who believed this is inhumane, and they worked to make a difference and work toward that even that battle to do that. So I don't want to disregard those workers, but we do know that it could have been a whole lot more. The overseer used to sit at the churches to make sure that the preacher was delivering the message of stay in this space of enslavement over liberation. So everything had to be done in secret in order for us to be able to get to where we are today.
Well, that's why we're having this conversation because, we know that we are speaking to a lot of people that are people of conscience. And we know in every wrong that has been done, there are people that rise up against that wrong.
Yes.
And this is why we're trying to bring this conversation to people.
Absolutely.
So that we can stir their heart and so they can do whatever they can in their own capacity. So how can non-Black allies, especially, Muslims, non-Muslims, honor this Juneteenth legacy meaningfully? What can we do as communities to promote this unity?
There's so many things we can do. Let's begin just by speaking that language and affirming with people of color. I see you, I hear you, I understand, I appreciate it. We also need to, as we're looking at ways to, if you're not African American and you're learning the full story, you're reading these books, you're watching documentaries, attending educational events, and then also support and uplift Black joy. So attend these events that we have. That helps you to understand a little bit more. Attend as a guest and a learner. Amplify Black voices online and in real life like you're doing now. Do this. More of this has to be done. And then there's a lot of unfinished work. Have those conversations. And then if you have the means, donate. Support causes that address Black education, maternal health, housing, or entrepreneurship. And then reflect on your role in liberation. Ask the question, how can I challenge racism in my workspace, in my schools, or in my institutions beyond Juneteenth? You can volunteer, offer your time to these events, to these organizations, and ask first what's needed, not what you assume is helpful. Ask what is needed.
Wow, thank you so much. That is so much, so needed. And to hear it directly from you, because I know you're such a great activist as well as a community leader, and you have actually put these things in practice. So this is not just words. These are words that are matched by actions. And I know that personally. And that's why I asked you for all this. I also think that people could support Black-owned businesses,
Yes.
because there's so many women that have started incredible businesses, and we could support those, not just women, but just, local businesses.
Absolutely.
So is there anything else? Oh yeah, I just wanted to ask you. So, Madam Q, do you have one word of wisdom that you'd like to part with us?
First of all, thank you. That's most important. Thank you. Because this is major, what you're doing. This is major. And I think if I had to leave one word of wisdom, it may be for us to remember that Juneteenth is not just a date, it's a doorway. And it is a doorway into memory, into mourning, and also into movement. So it reminds us that freedom was delayed, but never denied. Our foremothers and forefathers, they braided maps into their daughters' hair. They hummed directions into lullabies and planted seeds for liberation, tucked into their scalps, sung in hushed harbors, stitched into freedom quilts. All of that is major. And I think I want all of us to remember that. And as a Muslim woman, I honor the legacy of African American Muslim women, African Muslim women who were taken and renamed, silenced, but never erased. Their dua still lingers in the soil, and their resistance still rises in our own bones. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, and indeed we will surely test you with something of fear and hunger and loss of wealth and lives and fruits, but give good tidings to the patient, that patience is not passive, it's powerful. It's an act of spiritual defiance. So to every one of your listeners, every one of your viewers, I want you to remember that your joy is a form of resistance. Your rest is a strategy, and your prayers are powerful. Your voice, your sacred, vibrant voice, is one your ancestors fought for. Let us not forget, let us not falter, and let us walk in freedom with our fists raised, our heads high, and our faith rooted deep. Amen.
Wow. Thank you, Madam Q. That was not just words of wisdom, that was a template, a blueprint. I really want to thank you for helping us not just see Juneteenth as a date, but as a doorway, a call to action. And this is why I go back to Sumaya, that beautiful Sumaya whose defiance still inspires us today. And as the Quran said, sometimes your action can bear fruits years later, right? I mean, like those seeds that were woven into the caps are fields and fields of okra and gumbo and all the things that we take for granted. So our listeners, how do these legacies of resistance speak to your current struggles, whatever your struggles might be, and how will you carry this legacy forward? So I think that if we just honor one another as fellow human beings, that would be a really great start. So until next time, stay wise and stay brave. Thank you. Thank you for joining me on Wise Women. If something stirred in you today, don't let it stop here. Share this episode with someone who needs it. Reflect on what resonated for you. And definitely plant one seed of change, however small. Remember, you do matter. And your actions have a ripple effect. But none of us can rise alone. To explore more resources and ways to get involved, do visit my website, daisycon.com. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review, because every click is your way of amplifying this message to others. Wisdom isn't just heard, my friends, it's lived. So let's live it. Until next time, stay wise and stay rooted.